35, notching its 33rd record of 2024. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Forecasters expect a monthly report on U.S. employment due out tomorrow to show a step down in hiring in June, along with a moderation in wage growth. A Bloomberg survey indicates payrolls probably rose by 190,000 last month, and that average hourly earnings likely increased by 3.9% from the year earlier, the least in 3 years. The unemployment rate is seen holding at 4%, the highest level in more than 2 years. The report is set to be published Friday by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Evidence is mounting that the U.S. labor market is slowing. The government says the number of workers collecting unemployment pay is the highest in more than 2 years. New claims for unemployment pay are also higher. In the meantime, payroll processor ADP reported Wednesday that American businesses hired the fewest workers since the start of the year in June. While industry data pointed to a slump in America's services sector, the ISM Services Index registered the worst showing in 4 years in June. There's been a sharp pullback in business activity, and orders also fell last month. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Scott Carr, and this is Bloomberg.
Now, a sports update on Bloomberg 1130.
The Mets fell to the Nationals in James Woods 7-5 in D.C. The Metropolitans go for a series win, however, in Game 4 in the nation's capital this morning. The Yankees fell again in the Bronx to the Reds 3-2. The Yanks will try to avoid being swept by Cincy this afternoon. Aaron Judge and Juan Soto will start in the outfield in the All-Star game for the American League. NYCFC beat visiting Montreal and Queens 2-0. That's your Bloomberg Sports Update. I'm Bill Herendon.
Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to the Odd Lots podcast on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Eisenthal.
And I'm Tracy Alloway.
Today you are listening to our conversation with Barb Stuckey, Chief Innovation and Marketing Officer at Matson, about how the food industry will prepare for a post-Ozempic world. Tracy, we like to talk about snacks and drinks and stuff on the show, and, you know, it's kind of just something we're interested in, but I actually think that, there's a deeper fundamental reason why we keep coming around to this topic.
Wait, it's not just because we like snacks?
I mean, that is the deep reason. But the other reason is, I kind of think, I've been thinking about this lately, that the proliferation of different types of snack foods and beverages and energy drinks, which multiply like crazy on store aisles, it's the ultimate story of capitalist success and the consumer economy, that we just keep getting this endless permutations of great flavors and different ways to consume these flavors. It's the pinnacle of the consumption economy.
Okay. Well, I would say, I guess capitalism, well, capitalism has to have some upsides, and I guess loaded flavored Cheetos are one of them. That's fair. I do think what's interesting to me about this moment in snacks is there seems to be sort of two things going on, two mega trends.
Yeah.
So the very early beginnings of two mega trends. So one is the idea of what's going to happen to snack food in a GLP-1 fueled world.
Yeah.
And we touched on this a little bit last year when we spoke to James Van Gielen, and he was talking about his Ozempic and GLP-1 investment thesis. And I really like speaking to him because it wasn't just all the companies that are making these drugs are going to see their share prices absolutely surge. It was also, there are going to be these second order knock-on effects on some consumer companies, and you could see that playing out a little bit last year. You can certainly see it playing out now. I think almost every major, food and beverage company that reported in the most recent quarter had a GLP-1 or Ozempic related question. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the other mega trend is just this idea of companies having to become more and more creative to also drive consumption. Yeah. So you have to have more flavors in order to grow your market share, to keep people engaged and interested, and posting pictures of your food on TikTok or Instagram or whatever.
I think about those sort of famous or infamous and maybe apocryphal things where it's like some Soviet leader came to the U.S. and saw a grocery store and it's like, okay, capitalism is the answer. Maybe there was something, but it really does feel like we're sort of at this moment where these maybe almost two megatrends are in competition with each other, right? Because there's this seemingly race to provide more flavor and more variety and more versions and special versions and stuff like that. And then the sort of looming threat to the sort of traditional way of doing business from the GLP-1s like Ozempic. So there is never too much snack food, and there is never too much conversation about snack food.
Well, the other thing that I just remembered, I totally agree, you can never have enough snack food, but the other thing was the conversation we had with Ryan Harlan,
That's
where
right.
he was talking about the technology that's now going into producing these snack foods, and also AI nowadays. So this idea that you can basically model a virtual manufacturing line for a new flavor. You can use AI maybe to come up with new flavors. So it seems like all of snack foods is getting more sophisticated, and some of it is, of course, in response to good old-fashioned consumer demand, give the customer what they want. But part of it also, I have to think, might be in response to competition from GLP-1 and Ozempic, and the idea that, well, if we're going to eat less food overall, then maybe the way to keep customers is to make sure that food is really, really interesting and good.
I'm glad you brought up the Ryan Harlan episode because, right, that was about the sort of supply-side innovations that allow companies like, say, Frito-Lay to try more limited run lines and move things faster and get a, you have a theoretical test flavor, you can make a chip faster. Anyway, so that raises the question, where does the flavor come in the first place when there is a new chili lime or a new durian flavored? But we do have the perfect guest because it's someone who is in the business of great flavors. We're going to be speaking with Barb Stuckey. She's the Chief Innovation and Marketing Officer at Madsen, which is a Silicon Valley-based food and beverage innovation company. She has written a lot about what makes great flavors, and she has studied a lot about this moment in flavor history. So Barb, thank you so much for coming on Outlaws.
Well, thank you for having me.
What do you do? The Chief Innovation and Marketing Officer at Madsen, what do you do in the flavor world?
Oh, what don't we do in the flavor world? So the company's been around for about 47 years, and over the course of those decades, we have worked in pretty much every food and beverage category that exists, with the exception maybe of beer.
Okay.
But we work on everything from baby food to alcoholic beverages to frozen entrees to confections to dietary supplements, and we also do work in the restaurant channel. So we work mainly for national and global restaurant chains, but we help them identify new menu categories and new menu items. So we are really all over. 100% share of stomach is how we like to say.
I like stomach share. I've never heard that. I've never heard that one before, but that makes sense.
So one thing I was wondering is the basic premise of this conversation. I mentioned GLP-1 drugs earlier, and this is something that has come up in various forms on the podcast and also on various earnings calls, as I mentioned. Is this something that's on your radar as a Chief Innovation Officer in the food industry?
Yes, absolutely. It's very much on our radar, and I'll tell you how this happened. So, we work in food and beverage. We are not in the pharmaceutical industry, so we started getting some questions from our clients who range from some of the largest global CPG companies to small founder-funded startups. And they were asking questions about these new drugs and what's going to happen, and should I be worried about this? And this was about middle of 2023. So in the fourth quarter of 2023, we decided that because of our position in the industry where we do work across companies and we work across categories, that we were going to educate ourselves and we were going to make ourselves as smart as we can about this topic, and we were going to then put forth the learnings that we gained and share them with the industry. So we just did that in a webinar format. It works like this. We handled it as we would do a client project. So we started reading secondary research that was out there. There was a great report from Morgan Stanley that enabled some of our learnings. And then we have a consumer panel at Matson. So these are just consumers who have been willing to give us their feedback on new ideas and products. And we surveyed the panels to see if anyone in our panel was on Ozempic or some of the other medicines. We call them AOM, anti-obesity medication. And we found out that there was about 125 people who were either on the drugs or had been on the drugs. So all of a sudden now we've got a patient population that we can talk to understand more. So we started doing that. We put a survey in front of those consumers and got to learn a little bit about what they were experiencing and how things were changing for them. We also talked to medical practitioners, so we talked to doctors, we talked to nurse practitioners, we talked to people who were prescribing the AOM, and then we did a lot of work with our proprietary AI models to talk to AI personas to see what was resonating with them, and that was super interesting as well. And then the last thing we did, which I can tell you more about, is we created some new food and beverage concepts, some new ideas. They ranged from beverages to snacks to meals, and we tested those ideas with our patient panel of humans, I should say. We did test them with humans, not our AI, which we can do, but we didn't do. So we have so much data, so much to share.
So let's start with some of that. Before we get to the new concepts, what did the 100 or so people in your panel who are on the AOMs tell you about their experience and how it changed their relationship with food and beverages?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to clarify, our sample size ended up being about